The sun was setting over the Florida coastline, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Lieutenant Commander Tanya Rodriguez had been looking forward to this evening jog for weeks. After 6 months of intense deployment overseas, she was finally home, and the familiar sound of waves crashing against the shore felt like the best welcome she could ask for. She laced up her running shoes on her mother's front porch, breathing in the salty air. Her mom had made her promise to stay for dinner, but Tanya needed this run first. The tension from months of high-stakes operations still sat in her shoulders, and running always helped her decompress. Plus, this beach had been her childhood playground. She knew every curve of the shoreline, every rocky outcrop, every quiet spot where the tourists never ventured. As she jogged along the water's edge, her feet splashing through the shallow surf, Tanya noticed how empty the beach was tonight. Usually there were at least a few people walking their dogs or couples watching the sunset. But tonight it was just her and the seagulls. That's when she saw it. About half a mile down the beach near the old pier that had been condemned years ago, there were lights. Not the steady glow of street lamps, but flashlights moving in quick, deliberate patterns. Tanya slowed her pace, her military training kicking in automatically. Something about the scene felt wrong. She moved closer, staying low and using the dunes for cover. As a Navy SEAL, situational awareness wasn't just a skill, it was survival. And right now every instinct she had was telling her to pay attention. 3 men were unloading packages from a small boat. They worked quickly, passing bundles wrapped in dark plastic to someone on the shore. The person on shore looked nervous, constantly checking over his shoulder. Even from a distance, Tanya could see these weren't fishermen bringing in their catch. The way they moved, the way they kept looking around, it all screamed illegal activity. She pulled out her phone and started taking photos, zooming in as much as she could without compromising the quality. Years of evidence collection during military operations had taught her exactly what investigators would need. She captured the boat's registration numbers, the faces of the men she could see clearly, and the distinct markings on some of the packages. Tanya was planning her next move when she heard it, the distinctive thump, thump, thump of helicopter blades cutting through the air. She looked up and saw a police helicopter approaching fast, its spotlight sweeping across the beach. For a second, she felt relieved. The authorities were already on this. But then something strange happened. The men on the beach didn't scatter. They didn't panic. Instead, they looked up at the helicopter and one of them actually waved. Not the frantic wave of someone caught in the act, but a casual, almost friendly gesture. Tanya's blood ran cold. She'd seen enough corruption during her service in various parts of the world to recognize it when she saw it. These men weren't worried about the police helicopter because someone in that helicopter was working with them. She started backing away slowly, keeping to the shadows. She needed to get out of here and report this through the proper military channels. NCIS would know how to handle corrupt local police. But as she turned to leave, her foot caught on something, probably a piece of driftwood, and she stumbled. It was just a second of lost balance, but it was enough. The helicopter's spotlight swung toward her, and suddenly she was bathed in blinding white light. She heard voices shouting, but couldn't make out the words over the roar of the helicopter blades. "Stay where you are. Don't move!" The voice came through a loudspeaker, harsh and commanding. Tanya raised her hands instinctively, showing she wasn't armed. The helicopter descended, kicking up sand and forcing her to squint against the wind. Her heart was pounding, but she kept her breathing steady. She'd been in tighter situations than this. She just needed to explain who she was. 2 figures rappelled down from the helicopter with practiced ease. They were wearing police tactical gear, but as they got closer, Tanya noticed something odd. Their body cameras weren't on. The little red lights that should have been blinking were dark. "I'm a Navy SEAL," she called out, keeping her hands visible. "Lieutenant Commander Tanya Rodriguez. I was just out for a run and saw suspicious activity. I was about to report it through military channels." The first officer, a tall man with a crooked nose, grabbed her arm roughly. "Sure you were, sweetheart." "And I'm the president. Check my ID," Tanya said firmly. "It's in my pocket." "Military identification." The second officer, shorter but built like a linebacker, patted her down and found her wallet. He opened it, looked at her military ID, and his expression changed. For a moment, Tanya thought he was going to let her go. But instead, he showed it to his partner, and they exchanged a look that made her stomach drop. Well, the tall one said. "Looks like we've got ourselves a real hero here. Problem is, heroes who see too much tend to cause problems. I'm an active-duty Navy SEAL. Tanya repeated, her voice harder now. Whatever you think you're doing, you need to think very carefully about your next move. The shorter officer laughed, but there was no humor in it. You think that uniform makes you special? You think anyone's going to believe you over us? You're just another person in the wrong place at the wrong time. They forced her toward the helicopter. Tanya considered fighting back. She could probably take both of them, even with her hands restrained. But they were armed and she could see at least 2 more people in the helicopter. Fighting now might get her killed immediately. She needed to stay calm and look for an opportunity. They hauled her into the helicopter and it lifted off immediately. The door gunner kept a weapon trained on her while the 2 officers secured themselves in their seats. Through the open door, Tanya could see the beach falling away below them. They were heading out over the ocean. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "Where are you taking me?" "Taking you?" The tall officer grinned. "We're not taking you anywhere. We're just making sure you don't cause any problems." That's when Tanya understood. They weren't arresting her. They weren't even planning to hold her. They were going to kill her, and they were going to make it look like an accident. A woman goes for a swim, maybe gets caught in a current, body never found. It happened all the time in these waters. The helicopter climbed higher, moving further from shore. The lights of the coastline were becoming distant pinpoints. Tanya's mind raced through her options. She was trained for water operations, but a fall from this height into dark water could be fatal even for her. She needed to increase her chances of survival. She started talking, buying time while she prepared herself mentally. "You know this won't work. I called in my position before I started my run. It's standard protocol. When I don't come back, people will come looking. By the time anyone finds you, if they ever do, you'll be fish food," the shorter officer said. "Now, are you going to jump or do we need to help you?" "You're making a mistake," Tanya said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "I'm a federal military officer. This is a federal crime. Prove it," the tall officer said, and before she could react, he shoved her hard. Tanya felt herself falling backward through the open door. The wind screamed past her ears and the dark water rushed up to meet her. In that moment, as the helicopter disappeared above her and the ocean filled her vision, one thought crystallized in her mind with perfect clarity. They had no idea who they just messed with. She tucked her body, remembering every water insertion training she'd ever done, every high-altitude jump, every survival scenario she'd practiced 1,000 times. She took one last deep breath before she hit the water, and then the cold darkness swallowed her whole. The impact knocked the air from Tanya's lungs. The ocean at night felt like hitting concrete, and for a terrifying moment, she didn't know which way was up. Pain exploded through her left shoulder and ribs. The cold was instant and shocking, cutting through her running clothes like they weren't even there. But her training took over before panic could set in. She stopped fighting the water and let her natural buoyancy bring her to the surface. When her head broke through, she gasped for air, treading water while she assessed the damage. Her left shoulder was definitely dislocated. She could feel the sickening wrongness of the joint, and every movement sent white-hot pain shooting down her arm. Her ribs screamed with each breath. Probably bruised, maybe cracked. She touched her head gingerly and her fingers came away sticky with blood. Great. Head wound, probably from the impact. The helicopter was circling back. Its spotlight swept across the water, searching. Tanya took a deep breath and dove under, ignoring the protest from her ribs. She swam as deep as she could away from where she'd surfaced. When her lungs were burning and she couldn't hold her breath any longer, she came up slowly, keeping just her nose and mouth above water. The helicopter made 2 more passes, its spotlight turning the dark ocean into a patchwork of light and shadow. Tanya stayed as still as possible, knowing that movement would give her away. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only 10 minutes, the helicopter turned and headed back toward shore. They thought she was dead. Good. Let them think that. Now came the hard part. Tanya was about 2 miles from shore, maybe more. In normal conditions, that would be a challenging but manageable swim. With a dislocated shoulder, injured ribs, and mild concussion, it might be impossible. But impossible wasn't a word that meant much to a Navy SEAL. First, she needed to deal with the shoulder. Relocating a dislocated joint by yourself in the middle of the ocean at night was about as fun as it sounded, which is to say not at all. But Tanya had done it before during training and she could do it again. She floated on her back, using her good arm to keep herself stable. Then, gritting her teeth so hard she thought they might crack, She used a technique she'd learned from the team medic. She pulled her left arm across her body, then rotated it outward sharply. The joint popped back into place with a sensation that made her want to scream, but she kept it to a low grunt. The pain was intense, but it was better than before. At least now she had use of the arm, even if every movement hurt. She tested it carefully, moving it through a small range of motion. It would work. It had to. Tanya started swimming toward shore using a slow, steady stroke that wouldn't exhaust her. The key to long-distance swimming wasn't speed, it was efficiency. She fell into a rhythm, breathing on every third stroke, keeping her movements smooth and controlled. The cold was her biggest enemy now. Hypothermia could kill her just as surely as drowning. She kept swimming, kept moving, generating heat with the effort. She thought about her training, about the instructors who'd pushed her to limits she didn't know she had. She thought about the other SEALs on her team, the men and women who'd trusted her with their lives. She thought about her mom waiting at home with dinner getting cold. Time lost all meaning. There was just the rhythm of swimming, the sound of her breathing, the burn in her muscles. At some point, she realized she couldn't feel her fingers anymore. Then her toes went numb. She knew these were bad signs, but she couldn't stop. Stopping meant dying. When her hand finally scraped against sand, she almost didn't believe it. She'd made it to the shallows. Tanya tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. She crawled instead, dragging herself up the beach until she was clear of the water, then collapsed. She lay there for a moment, shaking violently from the cold and exhaustion. Every muscle in her body felt like it was on fire. Her shoulder throbbed with each heartbeat, but she was alive. Against all odds, she was alive. Tanya forced herself to sit up and look around. The beach was dark and empty. She had no idea where she'd washed up, but it wasn't near her mother's house. The coastline here was rocky, with heavy vegetation coming almost down to the waterline. Good. That meant it was isolated, which gave her cover. She checked her pockets. Her phone was gone, probably lost when she hit the water. Her wallet was still there, though soaked through. At least she had her ID. She tried to stand again and this time managed to get to her feet, though she swayed dangerously. There was an old lifeguard station about 50 yards up the beach, half hidden by palm trees. It looked abandoned with faded paint and broken windows. Tanya stumbled toward it, using the last of her strength. The door was locked, but one hard kick took care of that. Inside it smelled like mildew and salt, but it was shelter. She found some old beach towels in a cabinet, stiff with age but dry. She stripped off her wet clothes and wrapped herself in the towels, trying to stop the shaking. There was a first aid kit on the wall, ancient but still sealed. She opened it and found some basic supplies. Tanya cleaned the cut on her head as best she could in the darkness, then wrapped it with gauze. She felt her ribs carefully. Probably just badly bruised, not broken. She'd had worse. The shoulder was the biggest problem. Even relocated, it would be weak and painful for days. As the immediate crisis of survival passed, anger started to seep in. Those officers had tried to kill her. They'd thrown her out of a helicopter like she was garbage, all because she'd witnessed their criminal activity. And they were probably back at the station right now, congratulating themselves on getting rid of a problem. But Tanya wasn't dead. And now they had a much bigger problem than they could possibly imagine. She needed to contact her command, but she couldn't just walk into a police station, not when she didn't know who was corrupt and who wasn't. Those officers had moved with the confidence of people who felt protected. That meant the corruption might go deeper than just two bad cops. Tanya spent the night in the lifeguard station, dozing fitfully between waves of shivering. As soon as the sun started to rise, she knew what she had to do. There was a Coast Guard station about 5 miles north. They would have secure communication equipment, and as a fellow military branch, they were outside the local police chain of command. She put her damp clothes back on, grimacing at the clammy feel of them against her skin. Her whole body ached and her head pounded with each step, but she started walking. The beach was starting to fill with early morning joggers and surfers. Tanya kept her head down, not wanting to draw attention. She probably looked terrible, but hopefully people would just assume she'd had a rough night. The walk took almost 3 hours. By the time she saw the Coast Guard station, Tanya was running on pure determination. She walked through the front gate, past a surprised young sailor, and straight to the duty officer's desk. "I'm Lieutenant Commander Tanya Rodriguez, U.S. Navy SEALs," she said, her voice hoarse. "I need to use your secure communications immediately. It's a matter of national security. The duty officer, a Coast Guard lieutenant, took one look at her and his eyes widened. Ma'am, you need medical attention. Communications first, Tanya insisted. Then medical. I need to contact NCIS right now. To his credit, the lieutenant didn't argue. He led her to a secure room and set her up with the equipment. Tanya placed the call to NCIS headquarters, requesting an immediate connection to the special agent in charge of the regional office. When Agent Vincent Torres came on the line, Tanya gave him the abbreviated version. This is Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez, Team 7. I witnessed a drug operation on a Florida beach last night involving local police. When they discovered me, they threw me out of a helicopter over the ocean. I survived. I need protection and I need an investigation started immediately. There was a long pause. Ma'am, can you repeat that? Tanya did, adding more details this time. As she talked, she could hear Torres typing rapidly in the background. Lieutenant Commander, I'm looking at your service record right now, Torres said. You're supposed to be on leave in Florida. Are you injured? Yes, but I'm functional. Agent Torres, these officers tried to kill me, and I don't think they were acting alone. The way they moved, the confidence they showed, it suggests institutional protection. We need to move quickly before they realize I survived and try to cover their tracks. Understood. Stay where you are. I'm mobilizing a team now. We'll be there in 4 hours. In the meantime, I'm sending local FBI to provide security. Don't trust local police. Don't talk to anyone outside the Coast Guard base. Are we clear? Crystal clear, Tanya said. After she hung up, the Coast Guard corpsman checked her over. He wanted to send her to the hospital, but Tanya refused. She wasn't leaving the base until NCIS arrived. Instead, she let him treat her injuries there, giving her painkillers and wrapping her ribs properly. Then she sat down and started writing everything she remembered. Every detail of the men on the beach, their boat, the packages. The faces of the 2 officers who'd thrown her from the helicopter. The numbers on the helicopter itself. The location where it all happened. Every piece of information that might help build a case. Those corrupt officers thought they'd silenced her. They thought they'd eliminated a witness. They had no idea that they'd just made an enemy who had the training, resources, and determination to bring their whole operation down. Tanya looked at her reflection in a window. She looked like she'd been through a war. Maybe she had, but she was still standing, and that was all that mattered. Agent Torres arrived exactly 4 hours later, just as he'd promised. He came with a full team, 3 other NCIS agents, a forensic specialist, and 2 FBI agents for additional support. When Tanya saw them walking through the Coast Guard base, professional and purposeful, she felt something close to relief for the first time since the previous night. Torres was in his early 40s, with gray starting to show at his temples and the kind of eyes that didn't miss much. He shook Tanya's hand carefully, noticing how she favored her left shoulder. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez, he said, I've read your service record on the flight over. It's impressive. But I have to admit, when I first got your call, I thought maybe you'd hit your head harder than you realized. Then I started making some calls of my own. And? Tanya asked. And your story checks out in ways I wish it didn't. Torres gestured to the conference room the Coast Guard had set up for them. Let's talk. Once they were seated, Torres opened his laptop. Before we get into what happened to you, I need to show you something. 3 years ago, a marine biology graduate student named Lisa Chen disappeared from a beach about 10 miles from where you were last night. She was doing research on sea turtle nesting patterns. Her car was found in the parking lot, her shoes on the beach, but no body was ever recovered. He pulled up another file. 2 years ago, a tourist from Ohio named Robert Patterson vanished while fishing off the pier near that same stretch of beach. Again, his gear was found, but no body. The local police ruled both cases as accidental drownings. Tanya leaned forward, ignoring the pain in her ribs. But you don't think they were accidents? I didn't before, but I couldn't prove anything. Now, with your testimony, these cases take on a whole new light. Both of these people disappeared, near the same location where you witnessed the drug operation. Both were alone on the beach at night, and both cases were investigated by the same department that tried to kill you. How deep does this go? Tanya asked. Torres closed his laptop. That's what we need to find out. Tell me everything, and I mean everything, from the moment you started your run. Tanya spent the next 2 hours recounting every detail. Torres and his team took notes, asked questions, and occasionally exchanged glances that told her they were connecting dots she couldn't see yet. "The photos you took," Torres said. "You mentioned they were on your phone." "My phone is at the bottom of the ocean," Tanya replied, "but it had automatic cloud backup if we can access my account." One of the tech specialists, a young woman named Kelly Park, immediately got to work. "Give me your login information. If those photos uploaded before you lost the phone, we've got them." 15 minutes later, Kelly let out a low whistle. "Got them. And these are good. Really good. You got clear shots of faces, the boat registration, even some of the packages." The team gathered around Kelly's laptop. Torres zoomed in on one of the faces. "That's Raymond Diaz. He's a known associate of the Cortez cartel. We've been trying to build a case against him for years, but he's careful. Never handles the product. Himself always has layers between him and the actual drugs. Until now," one of the other agents said. Torres moved to another photo, this one showing the boat. "Run that registration." Kelly's fingers flew over the keyboard. "Boat is registered to a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands, but the corporation's address traces back to a property management company in Miami, and that company," she paused, her eyes widening, "is owned by the brother-in-law of Detective Philip Blackwood." "Who's Detective Blackwood?" Tanya asked. "He's the head of the narcotics division for the local police department," Torres said quietly. "He's also been decorated twice for his work against drug trafficking in the area. If he's involved, then the whole narcotics division could be compromised," another agent finished. Torres stood up and paced. "Okay, here's what we're dealing with. We have a drug smuggling operation with potential cartel connections. We have at least 2 officers who attempted to murder a federal military officer to protect that operation. We have a potentially corrupt narcotics detective, and we have 2 suspicious deaths that were ruled accidental. This is bigger than I thought." "What's our next move?" Tanya asked. "We need to identify the officers who threw you from that helicopter. Can you work with a sketch artist?" "I can do better than that," Tanya said. "I've got their faces memorized, but I also might have something else." She paused, thinking. "The helicopter had numbers on it. I saw them when they forced me inside. N7469. Kelly was already typing. "That's the tail number. Let me cross-reference with the department's fleet." A moment later, she had the information. "That helicopter is assigned to the Tactical Response Unit. Last night, it was signed out by Sergeant Wesley Hamilton and Officer Brendan Coe." Torres pulled up their photos from the department database. "Is this them?" Tanya studied the photos. The tall one with the crooked nose was Hamilton. The shorter, stockier one was Coe. "That's them. Those are the men who tried to kill me." "Got them," Torres said with satisfaction. "Now we need to move carefully. If we spook them, or if Blackwood is involved and finds out we're investigating, they could destroy evidence or run. We need to gather as much as we can before we make our move." Over the next 2 days, Tanya stayed at the Coast Guard base while the investigation expanded. Torres brought in more agents. They pulled phone records, financial statements, and flight logs. They interviewed the Coast Guard personnel who'd been on duty the night of the incident. A diver team was sent to search the area where Tanya had been pushed out, though she doubted they'd find her phone after 2 days in the ocean currents. What they did find was damning. Hamilton and Coe had made multiple flights over that section of beach in the past year, always at night, always on shifts that weren't officially logged. Their bank accounts showed deposits that didn't match their salaries. Coe had recently bought a boat, paid in cash. Hamilton had taken 3 trips to the Cayman Islands in the past 6 months. But the real breakthrough came when Torres' team pulled the helicopter's maintenance logs. Every police helicopter had a black box, similar to commercial aircraft, that recorded flight data. The department's tech unit was supposed to maintain these, but Torres got a warrant and seized the data directly. "Listen to this," Kelly said, playing an audio file. It was from the helicopter's internal communications system. "We've got a problem on the beach." That was Hamilton's voice. "Can we scare her off?" Coe responding. "Negative. She saw too much. She's got a phone out. Might have pictures. What do you want to do?" Same thing we did before. Out over the water, problem solved. Tanya felt cold listening to it. Same thing we did before, she repeated. He's talking about the other victims. That's how I hear it too, Torres said grimly. And there's more. He played another section of the audio, this one from after they'd thrown Tanya from the helicopter. You see anything? Hamilton asking. Negative. She went under and didn't come back up. It's done. Good. Call it in as a routine patrol. No incidents. What about the phone? She was taking pictures. Bottom of the ocean now. Even if someone finds it eventually, it'll be too damaged to retrieve anything. We're clear. Torres stopped the playback. They recorded their own crime. The system automatically records all flight communications, and they either forgot or didn't care. This, combined with your testimony and the photos, gives us a solid case for attempted murder. But we can use this to leverage them, get them to flip on whoever's above them. Blackwood, one of the agents said. Maybe, Torres cautioned. Or maybe it goes even higher. The corruption in narcotics divisions usually does. We need to be thorough. That evening, Torres brought in Police Chief Robert Morgan. Morgan was a 25-year veteran with a reputation for integrity, but Torres still approached the meeting carefully. They met at an FBI field office, neutral ground away from the police department. When Torres showed Morgan the evidence, the chief's face went through a series of expressions. Disbelief, shock, anger, and finally a kind of tired resignation. I knew something was off, Morgan said quietly. Drug seizures were down, but arrests were up. Lots of small-time dealers getting caught, but the big fish always slipped away. I thought my guys were just having bad luck. I never thought. He looked at Tanya. I'm sorry, Lieutenant Commander. If I'd been paying better attention, this might not have happened. With respect, Chief, Tanya said. The only people responsible for this are the ones who did it. But now we need to make sure they answer for it. Morgan nodded. What do you need from me? Access to your internal affairs files, Torres said. Quietly. And we need to know who else might be involved without tipping them off. Can you think of anyone in your department who you'd trust with your life? Morgan thought for a moment. Captain Lydia Foster, my second in command. She's been pushing for more oversight on the tactical unit for months, but I kept telling her I'd handle it. I should have listened to her. Bring her in, Torres said. We're going to need allies inside the department when this goes public. Captain Foster arrived an hour later. She was a no-nonsense woman in her late 40s who took one look at the evidence and started making a list of everyone she suspected might be involved. Blackwood is dirty, she said without hesitation. I've been saying it for 2 years, but he's untouchable. Too many commendations, too many connections. But his team, they all live beyond their means. New cars, expensive vacations, designer clothes. I ran the numbers once just out of curiosity. At least 6 detectives in narcotics are spending triple their salaries. 6? Torres echoed. You're telling me half the narcotics division might be corrupt? Maybe more, Foster said. The tactical unit works closely with narcotics. Hamilton and Co., they're Blackwood's guys. He requested them specifically for his operations. If they're involved, you can bet Blackwood knows about it. Torres looked at his team. We're going to need more resources. This isn't just 2 bad cops. This is a conspiracy. Over the next 3 days, the investigation became a complex operation. Torres brought in the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. They set up surveillance on Hamilton, Co. and Blackwood. They traced money through shell companies and offshore accounts. They found properties bought under false names, luxury items purchased with cash, and a pattern of protection that went back years. And through it all, Tanya waited. Her injuries were healing slowly. The headaches were less frequent. Her shoulder was getting stronger. But more than physical. Healing, she was preparing mentally for what came next. Because Torres had made it clear, when they moved on these officers, he wanted Tanya there. Not just as a witness, but as the person they'd tried to kill. The person who'd survived and come back to bring them to justice. It's not about revenge, Torres told her. It's about showing them that they can't do this. That throwing someone out of a helicopter doesn't make the problem go away. It makes it worse. Tanya looked at the evidence boards covering the walls of their command center, photos of Hamilton and Co., financial records showing the money trail, transcripts of the helicopter audio, maps showing the drug routes. "When do we move?" she asked. Torres smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. "Tomorrow morning. We've got everything we need. Federal warrants for their arrest, for Blackwood's arrest, for 4 other officers in the narcotics unit. We're going to hit them all at once before anyone can warn anyone else. I want to be there when you arrest Hamilton and Co., Tanya said. "I was hoping you'd say that," Torres replied. "In fact, I've got a special plan for how we're going to do this. You're going to walk into that police station tomorrow morning, Lieutenant Commander, and you're going to remind those officers that some people don't stay dead." The morning was clear and bright, the kind of perfect Florida day that belonged in postcards. Tanya stood in front of the mirror in her hotel room, adjusting her Navy SEAL dress uniform one last time. The white uniform was crisp and immaculate, her medals perfectly aligned on her chest. The National Defense Service Medal, the Afghanistan Campaign Medal, the Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal with Valor Device, and others that represented years of service and sacrifice. Her shoulders still ached, and her ribs protested when she moved too quickly, but she stood tall and straight. This uniform meant something. It represented honor, commitment, and the promise to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. The officers who'd thrown her from that helicopter had forgotten what it meant to serve. Today she was going to remind them. Agent Torres knocked on the door. "Ready, Lieutenant Commander?" "Ready," Tanya confirmed. Outside, a convoy waited. FBI vehicles, NCIS vehicles, and several unmarked cars containing federal marshals. This wasn't just an arrest. This was a statement. They were taking down an entire corrupt network, and they were doing it by the book with overwhelming force and absolute legal authority. Captain Foster rode with Tanya and Torres. She'd been instrumental in coordinating with the few clean officers in the department, making sure they'd be in position when the arrests went down. "Most of the department is good people," Foster said as they drove. "They joined to help their community, but Blackwood and his crew, they poisoned everything." Officers started looking the other way because reporting corruption was career suicide. Some of the younger ones thought this was just how things worked. "That changes today," Torres said. The police station was a modern building in the center of town. Torres had timed their arrival for the morning briefing, when the maximum number of officers would be present. As the convoy pulled up, Tanya saw a few officers outside notice them. One reached for his radio, probably to warn someone inside. "Now," Torres said into his own radio. FBI agents moved quickly, blocking the exits. Federal marshals took up positions around the building, and Tanya walked through the front door with Torres on one side and Foster on the other. The desk sergeant looked up and his face went white. He was young, probably in his mid-20s, and he'd clearly heard the description of the woman who'd supposedly drowned. Now here she was, very much alive, wearing a uniform that said she was way more than just a random witness. "Where's the morning briefing?" Torres asked, showing his credentials. The sergeant couldn't seem to form words. He just pointed toward the hallway. They walked through the station, passing officers who stopped and stared. Some looked confused. Others looked worried. A few looked relieved, like they'd been waiting for this moment. The briefing room was on the second floor. Through the window in the door, Tanya could see about 30 officers seated in rows. At the front of the room, Sergeant Hamilton was presenting something on a screen. Officer Coe sat in the front row. Detective Blackwood stood against the back wall, arms crossed, watching. Torres opened the door without knocking. Every head turned, and the room went absolutely silent. Hamilton froze mid-sentence. His face cycled through emotions, confusion, recognition, disbelief, and finally stark fear. Coe half rose from his seat, his hand instinctively moving toward his weapon before he caught himself. Blackwood's reaction was different. His eyes narrowed, calculating, already looking for exits. "Good morning," Torres said, walking into the room. "I'm Special Agent Torres, Naval Criminal Investigative Service. These are my colleagues from the FBI. We have federal warrants for the arrest of Sergeant Wesley Hamilton, Officer Brendan Coe, and Detective Philip Blackwood." "What is this?" Hamilton demanded, trying to sound authoritative, but his voice cracked slightly. "You can't just walk in here and—" "We can and we are," Torres interrupted. He nodded to Tanya. She stepped into the room, and the impact was immediate. Hamilton actually stumbled backward. Coe's face went gray. Even Blackwood's calculated expression cracked, showing genuine shock underneath. "For those who don't know me," Tanya said, her voice calm and clear, "I'm Lieutenant Commander Tanya Rodriguez, United States Navy SEALs. 5 days ago, I witnessed a drug smuggling operation on a local beach. When Sergeant Hamilton and Officer Coe discovered me, they forced me into their helicopter and threw me out over the ocean, intending to kill me." The room erupted. Officers were talking all at once, some in shock, others in anger. Captain Foster held up her hand. "Everyone stay calm," she ordered. "This is a federal operation and we are cooperating fully." Coe suddenly bolted for a side door. 2 FBI agents were waiting on the other side. They had him cuffed and secured in seconds. Hamilton turned to run toward the opposite exit, but Torres stepped smoothly into his path. The look on Torres' face stopped him cold. "Don't make this worse than it already is," Torres said quietly. Hamilton's shoulders slumped. He knew it was over. Blackwood was smarter. He didn't run. Instead, he held his hands out calmly. "I want my lawyer." "You'll get your phone call," Torres assured him. "Right after we book you for conspiracy to commit murder, drug trafficking, racketeering, and about 15 other charges." "Cuff him." Federal agents moved in and secured all 3 men. As they were let out, Hamilton looked at Tanya with something like hatred in his eyes. "You should have stayed dead," he spit out. Tanya stepped closer to him, maintaining eye contact. "I'm a Navy SEAL. We don't die that easily. And we definitely don't forget." After the primary arrests were made, the operation expanded throughout the station. 4 more detectives from the narcotics unit were taken into custody. 2 officers from the tactical unit were arrested. The station's evidence locker was sealed pending a full federal audit. Computers were seized. Files were confiscated. Chief Morgan addressed the remaining officers, his voice heavy with emotion. "I know this is difficult. I know some of you considered these men friends and colleagues, but the evidence is overwhelming and irrefutable. They betrayed everything this badge stands for. They tried to murder a federal officer. They protected drug dealers, and we have evidence they may have killed others." The revelation about potential other victims hit hard. Many officers had worked the Lisa Chen and Robert Patterson cases. They'd believed they were accidental drownings. Now they were learning the truth. One older officer, a detective named Vincent Hayes, approached Tanya later. "I worked the Chen case," he said. "I always felt like something was off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Hamilton and Coe offered to help with the beach search. Now I realize they were probably making sure we didn't find anything." "It's not your fault," Tanya told him. "Maybe not," Hayes said, "but I should have pushed harder. Chen's parents deserved better. Patterson's family deserved better." At the FBI field office, the interrogations began. Coe broke first, just like Torres predicted. With the audio evidence from the helicopter recording, he knew he had no defense. He confirmed that Hamilton had killed both Chen and Patterson on Blackwood's orders. Chen had witnessed a drug drop while collecting data for her research. Patterson had been fishing from his boat and had accidentally photographed a smuggling operation in the background of his sunset pictures. Blackwood said they were problems that needed solving, Coe told Torres, his voice hollow. He said it was us or them, that we'd all go down if anyone talked. I didn't want to do it, but Hamilton said this was how it worked. This was the job. "The job is protecting people," Torres said coldly, "not murdering them." Coe's testimony led to 3 more arrests. Officers who'd acted as lookouts during smuggling operations, who'd altered evidence, who'd warned dealers about upcoming raids. The corruption had infected the department like a disease. Hamilton tried to stay quiet, demanding his lawyer. But when he learned Coe was cooperating, his resolve crumbled. He gave up Blackwood completely, detailing years of operations, naming names, providing account numbers and locations of hidden evidence. Blackwood was making millions, Hamilton said bitterly. "We were just getting scraps. He promised us we'd be set for life, but we were taking all the risks while he sat in his office looking like a hero." Blackwood himself never talked. Even when presented with the mountain of evidence, he just smiled slightly and said, "Lawyer." But they didn't need his confession. The evidence spoke for itself. Bank records showing over $3 million moved through offshore accounts, phone records linking him to known cartel members, testimony from Hamilton and Coe, and the physical evidence from the smuggling operations that had been carefully documented by Tanya's photos and the subsequent investigation. The local media got wind of the story and it exploded. Navy SEAL survives murder attempt by corrupt police. Federal sweep takes down drug trafficking ring inside police department. Hero officer brings down the bad guys. Tanya hated the attention. She wasn't a hero. She was just someone who'd been in the wrong place at the right time. Or maybe the right place at the wrong time. Depending on how you looked at it, her mother, who'd been frantic with worry when Tanya didn't come home that first night, kept crying every time she saw her daughter. "I almost lost you," she kept saying. "But you didn't," Tanya would remind her. "I'm harder to get rid of than that." 2 weeks after the arrests, Torres called Tanya to the field office. When she arrived, she found him with a woman in her 50s and a man about the same age. "Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez," Torres said, "I'd like you to meet Richard and Susan Patterson." Tanya's breath caught. The couple whose son had been murdered by Hamilton and Cowden Susan Patterson stepped forward and took Tanya's hands. "Thank you," she said, her voice shaking. "We spent 2 years thinking our son had made a careless mistake, that he'd gone swimming at night and drowned. We blamed ourselves for not warning him more about the dangers. Now we know the truth. He didn't die because of carelessness. He died because he was in the way of bad men, and those men are finally going to answer for what they did. We'll never get Robert back," Richard Patterson added, "but knowing what really happened, knowing that someone fought to bring them to justice, that means everything." Tanya felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm so sorry for your loss." "Don't be sorry," Susan said firmly. "Be proud. You did what our son would have wanted someone to do for him. You survived, and you made sure they couldn't hurt anyone else." Lisa Chen's parents sent a letter, unable to make the trip from California but expressing similar sentiments. They'd created a foundation in their daughter's name to support marine biology students. They wanted Tanya to know that their daughter's death would lead to some good in the world. As the case moved toward trial, Torres kept Tanya updated. Hamilton and Co. are both cooperating fully. They're looking at life in prison regardless, but their cooperation means we can build cases against everyone involved. Blackwood is going down, but so is his whole network. We've identified cartel connections in 3 states. This is going to be a massive prosecution. "Good," Tanya said simply. "There's something else," Torres added. "The Navy wants to give you a commendation for your actions that night. The survival skills you demonstrated and the way you handled the investigation. And honestly, for just being tough as nails." Tanya smiled slightly. "Tell them I was just doing what any SEAL would do." "No," Torres said. "What any SEAL should do, maybe, but not many people could have survived what you survived, much less had the presence of mind to document everything and build a case. You're pretty remarkable, Lieutenant Commander." The preliminary hearings were set for the following month. Tanya would have to testify, relive that night, face Hamilton and Co. in court. But she was ready. She'd faced worse things than testimony in a courtroom. As she prepared to return to active duty with her team, Tanya spent one last evening on the beach. The same beach where it had all started. But this time she watched the sunset in peace, knowing that the men who'd turned this beautiful place into a crime scene were behind bars. Her phone rang. It was her team commander. "How are you doing, Rodriguez?" he asked. "Better, sir." "Much better." "Good, because we miss having you around. Think you're ready to come back?" Tanya looked out at the ocean. The water that had almost killed her but hadn't. The water she'd conquered through sheer determination and training. "Yes, sir," she said. "I'm ready." The federal courthouse was packed the morning the trial began. Media crews lined the steps outside, and the courtroom gallery filled with police officers, both those who'd been arrested alongside the defendants and those who'd come to support the prosecution. Family members of Lisa Chen and Robert Patterson sat in the front row. Tanya's mother was there too, determined to see justice served for what had been done to her daughter. Tanya sat at the prosecution table beside Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Reyes, a veteran prosecutor who'd built her career on taking down organized crime. Reyes was methodical and fierce, and she'd promised Tanya that she would leave no doubt in the jury's mind about what had happened. Across the aisle sat the defendants. Hamilton and Co. had separate defense attorneys, part of their cooperation agreements. They would testify against Blackwood in exchange for reduced sentences. Blackwood sat between his 2 lawyers, still maintaining the same calm expression he'd worn since his arrest. He looked like a man who expected to walk free. That was going to change. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Reyes presented the case systematically, building it piece by piece until the picture was undeniable. She started with the photos Tanya had taken, displaying them on screens for the jury to see. The faces of known drug traffickers. The packages being unloaded. The boat with its registration clearly visible. These photos were taken by Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez on the evening of her attempted murder. Reyes told the jury. She was simply out for a run when she witnessed criminal activity, and for that the defendants decided she needed to die. The helicopter audio was played in court. The jury listened in silence as Hamilton's voice casually discussed eliminating a problem. Some of the jurors looked shocked. Others looked angry. All of them looked at the defendants differently after hearing that recording. When it was Tanya's turn to testify, she walked to the stand in her dress uniform. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear people breathing. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. Reyes walked her through that evening step by step. Where she'd been running, what she'd seen, how she'd documented it, the moment the helicopter appeared, being forced aboard, the conversation between Hamilton and Co., and then the moment they pushed her out. "Can you describe what went through your mind as you fell?" Reyes asked. Tanya looked directly at the jury. "I thought about my training. I knew the fall would hurt, possibly kill me, but I also knew that if I stayed calm, if I used what I'd been taught, I had a chance. And I thought about those men getting away with it. I thought about other people they might hurt if someone didn't stop them. I decided right then that I was going to survive, and I was going to make sure they answered for what they'd done." "Did you think about revenge?" "No," Tanya said firmly. "I thought about justice. There's a difference. Revenge is personal. Justice is about protecting everyone." The defense attorneys tried to poke holes in her testimony during cross-examination. Blackwood's lawyer, an expensive criminal defense attorney named Gerald Hoffman, suggested that Tanya had misunderstood what she'd witnessed. "Isn't it possible, Lieutenant Commander, that in the dark and confusion, you misinterpreted the situation?" Hoffman asked smoothly. "No," Tanya replied. "I'm trained to observe and assess situations under pressure. That's part of my job as a SEAL. I know what I saw." "But you admit you suffered a head injury during your fall?" "Yes, after I hit the water. My observations and photos were taken before that injury occurred." "And isn't it true that you were on leave because you'd been under significant stress from your deployment?" Reyes stood immediately. "Objection. Relevance? Sustained," the judge ruled. "Counselor, the victim's mental state is not on trial here." Hoffman tried different angles, but Tanya remained calm and consistent. She'd faced interrogations by enemy combatants during training. A defense attorney in a comfortable courtroom wasn't going to shake her. Co testified next, and his testimony was devastating for Blackwood. He described years of corruption, how Blackwood had recruited him and Hamilton, how the detective had convinced them they were just working smarter than other cops. He made it sound reasonable, Co said, his voice barely above a whisper. He'd say things like, "We're not helping the big dealers, we're just making sure the small-timers stay small." But it was never just that. It kept getting bigger. More money, more risk. And then there were people who saw things they shouldn't have seen. Like Lisa Chen, Reyes prompted. Co nodded miserably. She was taking water samples or something. She saw a drop. Blackwood said she had to go. He made it sound like we had no choice. "Did you have a choice?" "Yes," Co said, tears running down his face. "I should have said no. I should have reported it. But I was scared, and I was in too deep. So I helped Hamilton, and we made it look like an accident." The courtroom was silent except for quiet crying from the Chen family. Hamilton's testimony was similar, though he showed less remorse. He portrayed himself as a victim of Blackwood's manipulation, but his own words from the helicopter recording undermined that defense. It was clear he'd become comfortable with violence,